He laughed the hardest when I spilled coffee on my tie 10 minutes after getting fired on my 60th birthday. Name's Rufus Warehouse Foreman for 32 years now. Staring at a pink slip under flickering fluorescent lights. Still kept my old brass nameplate in my lunchbox, just in case. Ever had someone underestimate you so badly they accidentally lit your fuse? They were whispering by the altar when I heard its soft clipped cutting. "She smells," Ashline said. I stood just off the center aisle, adjusting the knot in my tie for the third time, not because it needed fixing, but because my hands didn't know what else to do. The stained glass window above me threw lavender and pale yellow flecks across the floor, painting the dogwood petals Miss Letha had so delicately arranged. I reached into my breast pocket and touched the soft edge of June's old handkerchief. It was white frayed, hand-stitched in one corner. Breathe. That was her last word to me in her last year. A breath. A whisper. Fitting. I had told myself today would be a good day. My son was getting married after all. Gideon so eager to begin something he didn't quite understand. Maybe none of us do. And Aisling radiant in that particular way that comes with being told you're right a little too often. I hadn't expected kindness, but I'd hoped for courtesy. Miss Letha had been there since early morning, smoothing white linen, tying pew bows with practiced fingers. A retired librarian, her hands never trembled, not even when she was setting up communion or folding bulletins. The kind of woman who bore pain with such dignity that it made others uneasy. A little more to the left, I asked her, nodding toward the row of daisies in glass jars. She looked up, smiled that small, steady smile. "You always notice the details, Mr. Walden. Just Rufus, please," I said. "You've earned more respect than I have." She chuckled, then bent again to tend the arrangement. The church smelled of lemon oil, fresh paper, and the faint must of old hymnals. It smelled like memory. The doors opened. Organ chords trembled into the sanctuary. Guests began filing in murmurs, rising and fading like waves. Gideon looked every bit the joyful groom tuxedo, crisp hands fidgeting with his cufflinks, eyes searching for his bride. When Aisling entered, there was a collective exhale. She moved like someone who'd rehearsed this exact moment since childhood. Miss Letha offered the bouquet with both hands, and that's when Aisling leaned in. "She smells." 3 syllables said too quickly to be sweet, too casually to be mistaken. She didn't even look at Miss Letha. She took the bouquet, wiped her palms against her own skirt, as though brushing off dust, and walked down the aisle. I froze. Not from rage, from a slow, sick knowing that some things can't be repaired with time or tact. My eyes shot to Letha just in time to see her smile falter. Not fall. Just tilt a degree. Enough to shatter something inside me. Gideon didn't hear it. He was grinning, half crying, mouthing, "You're beautiful." The pastor was preparing his notes. No one but me and the flower arrangers seemed to notice. I clenched the handkerchief in my pocket so tight I could feel the stitching dig into my palm. I wanted to turn around and walk out right then, but I didn't. You don't ruin your son's wedding even when it's already begun to rot. Aisling walked past, bouquet held high. Miss Letha stepped aside with Grace returning to her corner seat, her hands folded in her lap, one thumb stroking the back of the other. I imagined her repeating a psalm in her head to keep herself from crying. I stood there blinking in the aisle, not at the bride, not at my son, but at the tiny tremble in Letha's hand. The vows would come, and the cake and the photos. But that moment had already split the day in two, before and after the whisper. The comment faded quickly for everyone except me. I couldn't forget it if I wanted to. The porch light blinked twice before settling into its usual amber pulse, casting long shadows across the backyard. Fireflies glimmered in the hedges, their rhythm too calm, too indifferent to the ache working its way through my chest. I sat on the old rocker June bought from an estate sale 15 years ago. One of the slats creaked more than the rest it always had. I never fixed it. Inside, I could hear Miss Letha rinsing dishes in the kitchen sink. The faucet sputtered once, then gave way to a soft, consistent stream. She hummed a gospel tune I couldn't name, and I imagined her drawing each plate like it was fine china, even though they were the same scratched-up set we'd used for the rehearsal dinner. She was always gentle with things, maybe because the world had not always been gentle with her. I leaned back, exhaled, and let the silence fill in the spaces Ashleen's voice had cut open. She smells. The words didn't ring out, they nested. Somewhere deep behind the collarbone between the ribs, like mildew under a floorboard. You don't see it, but eventually you can't ignore it. It wasn't the first time, just the clearest. A few months ago, Ashline had looked over the wedding photo list and asked ever so politely, "Does Miss Letha need to be in the family shots?" Her voice was smooth, sugar-glazed, the kind that made you feel unreasonable if you bristled. I had laughed it off, thought maybe she was trying to streamline the lineup. I should have noticed then. Another time, the bridal brunch at their townhouse. I arrived early, brought a lemon pound cake June used to bake for showers and funerals. Letha came with me, carrying a box of mason jars, wrapped in gingham napkins. Ashleen greeted us with a smile that felt just a hair too wide. She took the cake, nodded, then turned to Letha. "Would you mind coming in through the back? We're already set up in the kitchen, and it's a little tight. Letha blinked, then nodded. "Of course, dear." She walked around the hedges without a word. Later, as we cleaned up, I saw her unfolding napkins, smoothing them flat, then folding them again, each one she'd seen Ashlyn touch. That had stuck with me, like a dog turning its head to the wind. Alert, unsettled, not yet alarmed. Tonight I sat with June's handkerchief still in my pocket. My thumb rubbed the stitching until the loop of the bee almost felt smooth. I thought of June at her sharpest the years before illness softened her. She never raised her voice, but she didn't lower her gaze either. One time, watching a PTA meeting from the back row, she leaned over and said, "The quiet ones are the ones you listen to hardest." Miss Letha hadn't said a word all day. She hadn't had to. I thought of Gideon beaming in his suit, oblivious to the small wound his wife had opened. He had his mother's charm, and unfortunately some of my blind spots. Love makes you see the best in people, but sometimes that's the danger. Inside a cabinet clicked shut. Letha moved like someone who had done this chore 1,000 times and would still do it another 1,000. I could picture her drying each glass with the hem of her sleeve, even though the dish towels were within reach. My hand tightened on the armrest. There was something wrong here, and it wasn't just a wedding day slight. It was a pattern, quiet, precise, and almost elegant in its cruelty. I looked up at the stars peeking between the clouds. The sky didn't care, the yard didn't care. But I did. I sat there until the fireflies thinned, and the porch light began to hum faintly, as if remembering its age. My back ached. My knees locked. I should have gone to bed. But suddenly, I didn't want to sleep in that house anymore, not while pretending I didn't know what I now knew. Calder didn't ask why I called. He just said, "You buying coffee or am I Boone's Diner?" hadn't changed since 1998. Same cracked leather booths, same jukebox with Elvis crooning about lonely streets, same smell of bacon clinging to the air like it paid rent. I pushed through the door just as Can't Help Falling in Love started its loop again, and there he was, already seated, already sipping. He'd beaten me here by 6 minutes according to the crooked wall clock that hadn't told the truth in years. I slid into the booth across from him. My back met the duct-taped seat like an old argument settling. "You look like you've seen fog on a sunny day," Calder said, tearing open a packet of honey. "Or like someone just woke you up with your own conscience." I gave a dry chuckle and nodded at Mags, the waitress. She winked and slid me a mug before I could ask. "You boys want the usuals?" she asked, flipping her notepad with the flair of a Vegas dealer. Calder spoke first. "Biscuits for me. He needs bacon. He's got some thinking to do." Mags grinned. "You got it, sweethearts." She was halfway to the kitchen before I remembered I hadn't said a word. Calder dipped a biscuit into his coffee, then into honey, then took a bite. He chewed slow as if tasting memory. So he said between bites, "Ashline said something, didn't she?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "You ain't here because you're shocked," he continued, his tone unbothered. "You're here because you finally ran out of reasons to ignore it." I took the handkerchief out of my breast pocket, placed it gently on the table next to my cup. The fabric had softened with age. June's embroidery, her initials just a looping bee tucked in vines, had begun to blur. A faint spot of moisture seeped from the hem. I didn't know if it was condensation or sweat. She said Miss Letha smells. I said it low like it might bruise the air. Calder nodded. Of course she did. That surprised me. He swallowed his bite, wiped his mouth with a napkin he didn't use again. You remember when Janie died, and I couldn't open a can of soup without crying? I gave a small nod. Well, he continued her funeral. There was a woman there. Name of Ellen, worked with her at the packaging plant for 18 years. She stood up, tried to share a memory. And you know what the preacher's wife said afterward, called her? That factory lady? Like it was a rash. Janie built half that church with bake sales and elbow grease, and that's all she got. He leaned back, sipped, and shook his head. Folks ain't always cruel, but empty gets loud when it's nervous. Outside, a pickup rolled by. Its muffler gave a lazy cough before settling. Inside, the diner was quiet again, except for the slow churn of the coffee machine, and Elvis sighing his way through another chorus. So what do? I asked. Voice hoarse. Calder gave me that look, half brotherly, half like he'd seen the end of the film, and was just waiting for me to catch up. You already know. Hell, your gut's been yelling at you since the bouquet. I picked up the handkerchief, folded it in half, then again. I reached under my coat, opened the glove box key I'd tucked in my inside pocket. The deed papers were there, crisp, already signed 3 days ago. When my instincts first tugged, I didn't need anyone's permission to do what I already knew was right. Calder smiled, not with lips, but with eyes. Then what are you still doing here, boy? Mags returned with plates and a wink. Breakfast or a breakthrough, she asked, setting down the biscuits. Bit of both, Calder said. I didn't touch the food, just stared at the paper in front of me, and the small wet ring where June's handkerchief had rested, and the soft creases that had deepened like scars across the cotton. The diner door swung open. A new customer entered. A breeze followed. It smelled of spring and maybe of change too. Ashline only looked up from the phone when the smell of mop had barely dissipated. Miss Letha, she called, her voice as sweet as brown sugar, not yet dissolved in iced tea. Would you help me clean the guest bathroom this afternoon? And if you could, wear gloves. I think there's something wrong with the smell. I heard it from the top of the stairs, my hand resting on the wooden banister that June had varnished 30 years ago. It wasn't raised, it wasn't harsh, just cold enough to make the air shiver. Miss Letha stood in the doorway of the laundry room, stacking towels in her hands. She paused, nodded. Yes, Miss Ashline. There was no resistance, no surprise, but I saw the way she looked down, as if she were swallowing a large lump of salt that hadn't yet dissolved. I walked into the kitchen as if I hadn't heard anything, but my hand unconsciously tightened the corner of the handkerchief in my pocket. The little piece of cloth, the last gift June had hand-embroidered for me before she went to the hospital for the last time, was much worn, but still had the same old warmth. The familiar scent of lavender and old soap came back to life, making my chest feel tight. That afternoon, I found June's old apron in the laundry room drawer, a heavy blue and white striped fabric with ruffled edges. Miss Letha picked it up, running her fingers along the frayed edge, as if touching a sacred relic. June always wore this when she baked, she whispered. I remember one time she forgot the salt and the bread was still delicious. It was strange. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the bottom drawer like an old love letter. There was no cake for dinner that night. There was just pan-fried chicken lemon sauce and arugula salad on white china plates. Ashline placed each portion in front of everyone, speaking softly, smiling just enough. But Miss Letha's plate was taken separately to the laundry room. You eat here in peace, she said, so you don't get in the way. I turned to look at Gideon, who was busy typing on his phone. He was chewing, oblivious to what he was eating. When I asked why is Mama Letha eating alone, he shrugged. She must have said that to make it easier. She's always been known to choose her own place. Have you forgotten? No, I hadn't forgotten. But I remembered more clearly. Gideon had been so angry when his friends called Miss Letha the maid when he was little. He'd argued with his teacher because she asked if it was the maid who brought him to school. Now he couldn't hear a thing. Ashline sat across from me, her posture perfect, her back straight, as if she were in an old Southern ladyship class. She asked if I wanted more wine, then poured it and adjusted my napkin, without waiting for a response. Later on FaceTime with a friend, I heard her laugh. No, honey, the house is fine. House help is taking care of everything. You know me, I don't accept a misaligned tablecloth. I didn't look at her. I looked at the handkerchief on my knee. There were only a few faint purple stitches, the capital J faint as if it were about to disappear. The scent of lavender was still somewhere in my imagination. After dinner, I went into the study. No big lights, just the desk lamp. I took the envelope containing the house papers out of the top drawer and placed it next to the handkerchief on the wooden table. Then I pulled up a chair and sat down looking at both of them as if I were reviewing my will. The tabletop was worn, but the moonlight from the window hit the envelope just where it was revealing the bold letters Sycamore Lane. I gently slid it into the middle drawer where no one usually opened it. For the first time in months, I didn't feel a pang in my heart. Miss Letha was still washing dishes in the kitchen. I heard the faint clanking of dishes, the sloshing of water, and her softly singing something, "How great thou art," I thought. Her voice was thin and slow, neither sad nor happy, just the singing of someone who had suffered much and was used to living with an unfair silence. I stood in the hallway leading to the porch, my hands hanging down, feeling as if I had just stepped from the shadows into the light. The patterns on the curtains fell to the floor like patterns on my memories. Memories hurts and invisible patience. That night I slept. It wasn't a peaceful sleep, but it was the first time I closed my eyes without feeling like I was betraying someone. It was as if my conscience had finally grown a spine. As if this house where there had been love was quietly transforming itself from pretending not to know to being unable to do nothing. The house was still quiet when I placed the deed on the counter, right next to Miss Letha's breakfast mug. The rain had started before dawn, just a soft tapping on the skylight above June's kitchen, the one we'd never gotten around to fixing. The old grout between tiles was still the same, darkened at the edges, and the corners of the cabinet doors still caught if you weren't careful. June used to hum while navigating those flaws. Letha too. But today there was no humming, just that persistent drip-drip against the roof and the clink of ceramic when I gently pushed the deed closer to her cup. In my cardigan fingers still slightly stained from the ink I'd used to sign everything, I stood there breathing shallowly. That handkerchief, hers, now lay pressed against my chest, the golden repair threads still visible in the morning gray. I didn't know what I expected, honestly. Maybe peace, maybe nothing. The sound of her footsteps on the linoleum was so familiar it made me ache. Letha entered from the hallway, hands damp from cleaning her house shoes, making the faintest scuff. She paused when she saw me. Then she saw the envelope. "It's yours," I said simply, "if you want it." She didn't answer at first, just walked over and looked at the countertop like it might vanish. The mug, plain white with a single blue flower, was one she'd favored. I'd bought a whole set once, but they'd all broken over the years, except this one. It had a chip near the rim. She always turned that side away. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "The deed," I said. "To the house." Her eyes didn't move from it. "Mr. Walden, that's not a joke you ought to make before coffee." "I'm not joking." Silence stretched. The rain ticked a little faster. A bird chirped, then fell silent again. She reached out, touched the envelope with 2 fingers, then withdrew them, like it might burn. "You signed it?" she asked. "Yes. And it's legal?" "Yes." Why? I sat down slowly at the kitchen table and folded my hands. "Because you built this house, same as June and me. You scrubbed these floors when I couldn't. You held Gideon when his fever broke, and I was too rattled to move. You're not house help, Letha. You're the frame. The reason things didn't fall apart sooner." I watched her throat tighten. "I was paid," she said. "I was just—" "Don't finish that sentence," I said more sharply than intended. "You were family, and I failed to say it loud enough while someone else was trying to erase it." The envelope sat between us like a sealed apology. Its flap had a faint red wax seal, something June had once used on thank you notes. I'd kept a few, stashed them in my drawer, along with the better part of my regrets. "You remember June's handwriting?" I asked. Letha smiled faintly. She wrote like she was trying not to offend the page. "Well, she left a note once. It said, 'The one who smells like home always leaves the longest echo.'" I cleared my throat. I don't think she meant perfume. She chuckled once softly, then slowly tears welled in her eyes. At that moment, the front door opened. Ashline's heels struck the wood floor like punctuation marks. I didn't move. I'd left the envelope there on purpose. "Oh," she said, stepping into the kitchen with her purse still on her arm. "What's going on?" Letha turned away slightly, wiping at her face. I stood. Ashline noticed the envelope. "What is that, the deed?" I said. She blinked. "The deed to what?" "To this house." Her smile was brittle. "Why is it on the counter?" "Because I gave it to Miss Letha." For a second, nothing. Then a laugh, sharp, disbelieving. "You're giving her our house. She earned it. She was paid, Rufus." "That's what you see," I said. "That's always been the problem." Ashline looked at Letha now with something close to disgust. "Is this some guilt trip? What did you say to him?" "Nothing," Letha said quietly. "He came to this himself." "You're betraying your family," Ashline snapped. "You're humiliating Gideon." Rufus clenched his fists, then let them go. "This isn't betrayal," Letha said. Her voice was steady. "It's truth. And truth can sting, especially when you've been wearing perfume over it." Ashline scoffed, turned to me. "You really think this makes you noble?" "No," I said. "I think it makes me late. But not too late." Just then, Gideon stepped into the room. He looked at me, then at her. His eyes fell on the envelope, on Letha. No one spoke. And for the first time since the wedding, I saw my son hesitate. They didn't scream. Ashline just smiled too hard. That's how I knew it had begun. The smile wasn't warmth. It was barbed wire tucked behind lipstick. She crossed her legs like a litigator, not a daughter-in-law. Gideon sat beside her, stiff in his blazer, the same one he wore to his mother's memorial. That hadn't gone unnoticed either. I adjusted my cardigan. The office smelled like lemon wipes and stale carpet. Rain tapped the window in fits, not a downpour, just persistent enough to be annoying. Across from me, Mr. Devlin Gray, Ty Grayer expression cleared his throat. So Ashline began, tone crisp. "We're here because we have concerns about Rufus's mental capacity." No good morning, no hesitation. Gideon winced. I saw it, the flicker. Like a camera flash you pretend didn't blind you. I didn't speak. I just slid the folder across the table. Inside, notarized deed transfer, a video transcript, and a flash drive. Devlin opened it, adjusted his glasses, read. "You're claiming mental incompetence, Mrs. Walden. I'm asking for a review," she replied syrupy. "He gave away the family home to... Well, let's not pretend this isn't irregular." To whom, Devlin asked, although he knew. Ashline faltered. "To the caretaker, Miss Letha." Caretaker. Like she had no name. "She's been with us 38 years, I said, my voice like a dry page turning. "She knew June longer than you've known Gideon." Ashline glanced at Gideon, but he was staring at a poster on the wall, something about estate planning and sunsets. Devlin clicked his pen. "Mr. Walden, is this your signature on the deed?" "Yes." "And this letter of intent?" "Yes." "May I ask about the video file?" I nodded. "It's a recording from the morning I gave Letha the deed. She didn't know I was filming, but you'll hear her say she understands, that she accepts." He plugged in the drive. The room filled with quiet sound, my voice calm, Letha's voice trembling. At one point she laughed nervously. "You're not serious," she'd said. Then softer, "I don't know what to say." The pause before my reply. "You don't have to say anything now. Just hold it." Ashline tried to interrupt. She was pressured. She said thank you. Devlin cut in. She held the envelope. She cried. Silence. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a second envelope. "Emails," I said. Devlin raised an eyebrow. "From Ashline. Wedding planning correspondence. Insulting Letha. Sent to the planner by mistake. CC'd to Gideon." Gideon flinched. I never read them. I placed a printout on the table. "Does she even own deodorant?" it read. Signed Ash. Ashline hissed. "That's out of context." "It was months ago," I said. "But context doesn't erase ink." Devlin skimmed. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Walden. There's no legal basis here. Your father-in-law was within his rights. The documentation is complete, and frankly compelling." Ashline stood. "So you're siding with them?" Devlin blinked. "I'm siding with the law." She turned to Gideon. "Say something." He didn't. He looked at me, at the table, at the folder. I didn't push. I just stood up. My knees cracked softly, the only sound in the room. As I gathered my coat, the door opened. Calder stepped in, said nothing, just walked over, placed a hand on my shoulder. His touch was warm, rough, grounding. Ashline's voice followed me to the door. "You'll regret this." I paused. And for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. The scent of cinnamon and something softer, maybe cloves, drifted through the open kitchen window when I walked in. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving behind a hush only broken by the creak of the wooden floor and the low hum of Miss Letha's song. She moved with ease between stove and sink, a towel draped over one shoulder, sleeves rolled high. The apron she wore wasn't hers. It was June's. On the countertop, next to the warm pie cooling in its glass dish, sat the handkerchief. Still folded, still stained. I hadn't touched it since the meeting with Devlin, but I didn't need to. Its presence felt like breath. "Good morning," I said. Miss Letha didn't startle. She never did. "You hungry?" she asked, turning just slightly. Her voice was clear, firm, light, as the piano jazz whispering from the old radio by the fridge. I nodded and sat at the table. Sunlight filtered through the half-drawn curtains, throwing soft rectangles onto the floor, the kind of light that felt like permission to start again. "I hope you know," she said as she set down a mug of coffee. I didn't cry because of the house. I looked up. Her eyes held no debt, no resentment, just clarity. "I know," I said. "You cried because someone finally saw." She nodded once, then pulled a chair across from me. "But I don't want to live here alone." I expected that. What I didn't expect was the next thing she said. I was thinking, what if this place didn't belong to me, but to more people like me, folks who've spent years giving care, cleaning after everyone until they've got nowhere to rest? "A respite home?" I asked, brows raised. "A sanctuary," she corrected gently. "Not clinical, just quiet, with pie." I laughed, really laughed, the first in weeks. "You'd run it better than anyone." She reached over and placed her hand atop mine. "Not alone, with the community, with you if you're willing." Before I could answer, the front door clicked open. Gideon's voice followed, hesitant, quieter than I remembered. "Dad, you here?" "In the kitchen," I called. He entered, soaked from the neck of his hoodie down to his sneakers, hair sticking out in every direction. He looked older and younger at once. "I didn't come to argue," he said before anything else. "Good," I replied. "Neither did I." He sat beside me, eyeing the pie, but not reaching. "I've been thinking." I didn't listen. Not to you, not to her. I let things slide. I pushed a mug toward him, placing the handkerchief beneath it like a coaster. He noticed, said nothing, but his hand trembled a little when he lifted the cup. "I want to do better," he said. "I don't know how yet. You just started." Miss Letha said, her voice as even as always, but gentler now. I reached into the drawer by my knee and pulled out the old photo, the one of June and Miss Letha laughing in the kitchen flour on their cheeks. I slid it across the table. "She kept that framed," Gideon whispered, recognizing it. "She wanted us all to remember," I said. "Not just the hard things, the good ones too." Miss Letha took the photo, ran her thumb along the edge, then stood to pour more coffee. "There's a box marked June's Things," she said quietly. "I found it near the laundry room. I thought maybe we'd open it." "When you're ready," I nodded. "Let's do it together, Sunday." She smiled. "Sunday's good." Before she left the room, Miss Letha handed me something wrapped in brown paper. I unwrapped it slowly. June's apron, folded with the same crisp corners Letha always used for linens. "She'd be proud," she said simply. I swallowed. "I hope so." "No," she said. "She would." Outside, the wind picked up again, nudging the window curtains forward in slow motion, like they too had something to say. We didn't close the windows that day. The scent of cinnamon and rain stayed with us. And for the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel like a place holding its breath. It felt like a place beginning to breathe. They didn't scream. Ashline just smiled too hard. That's how I knew it had begun. There was something brittle in her cheeks that morning, a tension that made her foundation crack under the fluorescent lights of Mr. Devlin's office. Gideon stood to her left, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his gray suit, not saying much. I sat across from them in a chair that wobbled slightly every time I crossed my legs. The room smelled of lemon wipes and stale carpet, a scent that never quite left these kinds of spaces. Ashline cleared her throat, then said in a voice too sweet, "We're here because we're concerned about Rufus's cognitive state. His recent actions have been erratic." She dropped the word like a pebble into a still pond and waited for the ripples. Mr. Devlin, calm and unreadable behind rimless glasses, adjusted a folder in front of him and said, "Please continue, Mrs. Walden." I didn't say a word. I didn't have to, not yet. Ashline glanced at Gideon, expecting backup. When he didn't jump in, she leaned forward, manicured fingers lacing together. He signed over a house deed, a major asset, without legal consultation, to a woman who's not even family. Miss Letha has been a part of our household longer than most of our furniture, I said quietly. Ashline's smile thinned. Yes, and furniture doesn't get inheritance. Mr. Devlin didn't blink. He flipped a page. Mr. Walden, did you make this transfer with full understanding and intent? I reached into my bag and pulled out the small flash drive Calder had helped me format. Would you mind plugging this into your monitor, Mr. Devlin? He obliged. The screen lit up. The video wasn't long, just under 3 minutes. It showed me in the Sycamore Lane kitchen, early morning light, handing Miss Letha the envelope. Her laughter disbelieving, her hand over her mouth, her quiet tears, her voice saying clearly, "I would be honored, Mr. Walden." Ashline's mouth parted, then closed. She didn't speak. I recorded it, I said, because I knew today would come. Mr. Devlin turned the screen back to himself. She accepted freely. You were calm, lucid. The timestamp lines up. Unless there's concrete evidence of coercion. Ashline shifted in her seat. This is elder abuse, emotional manipulation, I interrupted. No, what's abuse is making someone feel invisible in the home they've helped hold together for decades. Mr. Devlin cleared his throat. Additionally, he said, sliding a folder across the table, Mr. Walden has supplied several emails retrieved from planning vendors. These include language directed toward Miss Letha that could be considered discriminatory. Ashline paled. They were sent from your address, Mr. Devlin added gently. Can we please make sure the old lady isn't in the background of the pictures? And this one, does she even own deodorant? Signed Ash. Gideon's eyes flickered, his mouth open then closed. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was honest. I straightened. You asked if I was of sound mind. I'd say clarity doesn't get clearer than this. At that moment, the door creaked open. Calder Boone stepped in, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and cold wind. He nodded at me, then found an empty chair in the back. Didn't say a word. Just sat, hands resting on a cane I'd never seen before. Ashline's eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. I stood. Maybe, but not today. Mr. Devlin tapped the folder gently. From a legal standpoint, there's no standing to reverse the deed. Miss Letha is now the lawful co-owner of the Sycamore Lane property. Calder rose with me, placing a hand on my shoulder as we turned toward the door. It was heavy old oak, one of those doors that creaked like it had heard too much. As I stepped through it, I heard Ashlin's voice again, sharp as a whip. You'll regret this. And for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. The wind came in gentle through the open window that morning, carrying the smell of cinnamon and old wood like a house remembering how to breathe. On the mantel, the new handkerchief sat folded with care. Golden thread glinting softly where the old tears had once frayed it. I used to think justice needed a gavel. Turns out, sometimes it just needs a cup of coffee, a kitchen table, and someone finally being seen. Maybe dignity isn't something you give, it's something you stop taking. If life ever handed you a second chance, dressed as a quiet morning, would you have opened the door? I'd love to hear your story or your thoughts. Share it in the comments if you feel called.